What's up, knife nuts? It's Old Sluggy. Hope y'all are doing well. Let's take a quick trip down memory lane and take a look at the trajectory and historical importance of this iconic piece, the Grimsmo Norseman. This blade is functional, visually stunning. It's also a very complex grind. The main edge is a hollow grind, and the front edge is a flat grind. We've got this very cool 3D machining on the primary grind. The steep grind, along with the tanto kind of recurve point profile, I think all add to the visual beauty of the blade. One of the few gripes that I had with this knife initially was the use of RWL 34 steel. I just thought maybe they could upgrade to S35, 90, 110, M390, in 690. But then I learned that RWL 34 is very similar to CPM 154, which when you first get into the custom world might seem like an inferior steel. But as you learn more, you'll see that some of the finest custom knife makers actually use CPM 154 almost exclusively. Tashi Baruka uses CPM 154. I believe Matt Cucciara uses CPM 154. Don't quote me on that. But several very high-end custom makers use CPM 154. So it begs the question, with production knife companies such as Riat and We Knives coming out with such incredibly high production pieces. Take the Riat Jack, for example, a titanium frame lock integral for about $500, $450. The Pena X series with Riat knives. Is there still a place for a knife like the Grimsmo Norseman? Ultimately, that comes down to your budget. As a collector, there will always be a place for the Norseman. As somebody who likes to own one very nice knife versus having a collection, there will always be a place for this knife. Its functionality is absolutely phenomenal. But if you just are gonna have a knife or two and you can't get yourself up into the $700 or $800 range, then I don't think this knife is as relevant as it once was. It always will be for me, and its historical significance will never be undermined. The blade to weight ratio is 0.73, as is the blade to handle length ratio, 0.73. So that's part of what explains why this knife feels so good. The balance between the blade and the handle is so perfect. 8.625 on the OAL, overall length, and 3.625 on the blade length. And I believe that refers to the cutting edge, because this blade, I believe, is a little bit longer than that. You've got a 5-inch handle. The weight stock before any modifications, like adding this thumb stud, is 4.97 ounces. I would definitely put this knife in the category of piercer, slicer. Comes down to a very thin, fine edge. It is a titanium frame lock. As you can see here, we're at number 2,377. I've had probably 12 to 15 Norsemen since I started collecting. The first one was the hardest to get and by far the most expensive. I believe I paid $1,450 for it. Drop price at that point, I believe, was between $600 and $750 or $800. The Grimsmo brothers did something that I think was very smart and just. Seeing the incredible gap in the secondary market, they upped their prices. Now, they did add a nice case, a tool, and some nano oil, if I remember correctly. It's a great oil. I think that was just kind of a nice gesture. The way I read it when it happened was, hey, you know, if so much money is being made on the secondary, why don't we just up our prices direct from maker so that we actually make a little bit more of that money? And I think that that is perfectly reasonable. So direct from maker prices and secondary prices, the gap closed. Now, interestingly, as we start getting up into the mid-2000s, we're seeing a steady devaluation, monetarily speaking, of the Norseman, because there are so many out there. So now we are at a point where you can actually get a Norseman secondary for direct from maker price or even a little below. I remember the first time that I got a Norseman secondary for direct from maker price, and I thought to myself, wow, what a shift. And now, that was probably a year ago, so now it's even more dramatic. I'm not exactly sure how the action on this knife is as smooth as it is, but I do know that the detent ball in there is really tiny. When you come over it here, you can barely feel it. You see the detent ball, you can barely see it there. Just gonna cross it right there, and you see it doesn't even miss a beat, and that's why it can just drop like that. So something about the sizing of the detent ball definitely plays a factor. The other key, I think, is the weight ratio is absolutely perfect. So the blade stock, the handle stock, the weight in the blade, the weight in the handle, probably as good on this knife as any knife in existence. As we all know, the blade has been polarizing from day one. I am in the camp of love it. However you feel about the blade, there are a few interesting things to take note of, and that is that there are two piercing points. You have this one down at the bottom, and you've got this guy up top. So you've really got two tips. To jump in with just a quick overview of this piece, it's very light due to what I believe are barrel spacers here, from my knowledge of the Balisong world and what these look like to me. But there's no real back spacer there. It's also very thin. Blade stock and handle stock. It's a big knife, but it carries very light and discreet and disappears in the pocket. So John Grimsmo, as many of you know, started off as a knife modder. Then his brother Eric got on board, and I believe their father did as well. And this was the first model that they put out. But it had actually been in the works for quite a while. Many would argue that the Grimsmo Norseman kind of started the CNC revolution, right? So this is what I refer to as a custom knife, but not a handmade knife, meaning there are machines involved, and in this case, a decent amount of machining. The Grimsmo brothers are also pioneers in the sense that they, one of the early makers to really give an in-depth, behind-the-scenes look and explanation of the process of knife making through their YouTube videos that came out, I believe, like every Tuesday or every Wednesday. And so in no way were they trying to hide the fact that this was a CNC knife. Quite the contrary. They were showing what a CNC machine was capable of. So any controversy about whether this is a production knife, a mid-tech, or a custom, ultimately comes down of how you define it. I think the definition custom CNC knife here is perfectly adequate. It's not a GTC where on his sole authorship pieces, not only does he make the entire knife by hand, but he actually makes all the materials himself as well. It's not a Black Snow, Natia Moore, or Lee Lehrman, or Glenn Waters. On the other side, it is more custom, in my opinion, than a production Shirogoro. The CNC revolution brought about something very fascinating, in my opinion, which is so the build quality of a custom mixed with the quality control of a production knife. Almost every Norseman feels the exact same, which is a good thing.